You'd be wrong if you thought that this unit was a detailed primary flight display or perhaps engine monitor, a full and comprehensive autopilot, nav and com radio stack with DME and audio panel, something to set your ADF, barometer and transponder. And why? Because this single unit is all of those and more. But you'd be absolutely right if you thought it was plug and play, absolutely no config required. Big welcome back to the SimHanger. My name's Mark, thanks very much for watching and let's get started. This is the Switcho Radio Panel from VirtualFly with the E upgrade. And yes, it has a 1024 by 600 display screen, but you can put your HDMI cables away, no need for pop-outs, because this unit has its own inbuilt Raspberry Pi computer, which means all it does is read the data from your sim, so the overhead on your system, well, it's next to nil. The unit comes standard with the nav and com radio stack and autopilot. Then via a software update you can upgrade to the E version, which gives you the PFD display as well. Cost for the upgrade is about an additional €60. If you do decide to go for the E upgrade option, the PFD has an engine monitoring section and auto selects the one most suitable, be it single or twin engine piston, single or twin turbo, as well as single or twin jet. These are not really aimed at airliners, more the light commercial options such as the Vision Jet. And with the Switcho radio having all that on board, it's suitable for instrument or visual flight. All my tests have been done using Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Config is currently single piston. Let's change that to a single turbo. There we go. That's for the TBM. Let's try the Kodiak. Let's now go for a twin prop. I think I'll select the Twin Otter. You can see in the inset the display has changed. Let's try single engine prop. There we go. But for these tests, I'm going to be using Diamond Aircraft DA62. When VirtualFly say plug and play, well, they're quite serious. Well, perhaps I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let's have a look at the unit itself first. Top left, it has an annunciator panel. Here you can see the parking brake on. You'll also get notice if pitot heat's not on, as well as a wide variety of system malfunctions. Next to that, you have the HSI mode indicator. What's really nice here is you just touch it here to change from GPS, Nav1, Nav2 and so on. And next to that you have a flap and trims indicator, which also shows the status of your landing gear, green for down, red for transition and off for up. The radio panel shows the status for the radio stack for Nav1 and 2, COM1 and 2, ADF and your transponder. It'll also indicate the mode that your transponder's in. There's a DME section that will give you distance to next VOR, also indicating of speed and minutes. Below that is your autopilot status panel, so such things as heading and alt will be shown here. Bottom left are all the dials and knobs required for changing the radios, ADF and transponder, and finally the full autopilot section, and we'll be demoing all of this a little bit later on in the video. Also in the bottom right is the master on-off power button. As shown earlier, you change to the PFD simply by swiping across with your finger. This contains two main sections. One is the engine status display, which changes depending on which aircraft you select, and your primary flight display with HSI indicator, with speed and altitude tape, as well as autopilot status at the top. The resolution of 1024 by 600 on what is a relatively small display brings a high level of clarity to the display, making everything easily readable. The colors are crisp, and it's difficult to reproduce that clarity when you're filming it, so please take that into account. To use any of VirtualFly's expansive range of products, you need to download the VF Hub, the relatively small program, and setup is easy. Find your peripheral, in this case Switcho radios, enable it, and you're done. The only other thing you need to worry about is whether you want to set your barometer to hectopascals or inches of mercury. Simple, straightforward. For any of you not familiar with VirtualFly, they're headquartered in Spain, but have retail outlets through third parties more or less worldwide. Their products are high-end and therefore they appeal to the prosumer. Therefore focus is on accuracy and highest quality. Flight Sim Peripherals is just one element of what they do. They also run a fully certified flight school, as well as a range of cockpit and motion simulators. I think it's fair to comment at this stage that not only are their products high-end, but so are their prices. This level of integration and quality doesn't come cheap. Prices available on their website and also more detail towards the end of this video. Let's have a quick look at what you get if you purchase. Comes with a number of channeled sliders, as well as a long set of feet to provide additional stability. The sliders provided are designed to fit into these slots so you can fit different units together from the VirtualFly range. You can also remove the front housing for panel mounting in a cockpit if you wish. Connection is via one USB A to C, as well as a separate power supply with a wide variety of different plugs to suit almost any location. The moment you pull the Switcho radio out the box, well, the quality becomes apparent. The housing, as far as I can ascertain, is all metal. Power supply and USB connectors conveniently at the back of the unit. The rotaries at the front are all knurled, and the buttons have a good feel to them and nice positive click. And when turning the rotaries, you get a nice tactile feedback. What the unit doesn't have are the dual rotaries that perhaps we're used to, although they do have a dual rotary function. Typically for nav1, for example, press the rotary in, it acts as a button, and it switches between nav1 and nav2. Rotate the dial and it changes the decimal numbers. Push down and rotate and it changes the whole numbers. Personally, I'd have preferred dual rotaries, but it's fairly intuitive and quick and easy to use, as I'll be demonstrating shortly. Some of the rotaries have up to 3 functions. Let's now jump into Sim. We're in and around the Panama Canal. As we load up, note the Switcho radio is already recording the information. Correctly identified twin-engine piston.
Mike Papa Foxtrot Sierra Traffic Diamond Golf. Romeo Foxtrot Tango Sierra.
In the interest of brevity and sanity, we won't be demoing everything, but this is an expensive piece of kit and it's important we understand how well or otherwise it works. Pitot heat showing on the annunciator panel, switch the pitot heat on and it's gone. Parking brake is on, let's take the parking brake off and that warning disappears from the annunciator panel. Parking brake back on. Let's take a quick look at our nav and comm radios. This is so much quicker and easier than using the mouse. That's why this sort of equipment is used for training. We can switch between nav1 and nav2 by simply pressing the button in. The active is highlighted. Turn the dial to change the decimal numbers. Push in and turn to change the whole numbers. To make your selective frequency active, simply press the transfer button. Press the button to select nav2, dial in the frequency and press the transfer button again. Both COM1 and COM2 radio channels work on exactly the same basis. The active channel is currently COM1, press the button and I can move it to COM2. Press again to COM1. Simply rotate the dial to change the decimals, hold down and rotate to change the whole numbers and you can then transfer. Let's test out the transponder. If I push down and rotate the dial, have a look on the PFD and you'll see that the mode is changing from standby to on to alt and so on. To enter a transponder code, press it in once, then rotate to change the first number, press it in again to change the second number, and so on. I'm putting in a transponder code of 5555. Let's now check that the VOR DME is working. I've got a VOR station fairly near to me. Just going to dial in the frequency 109.0, transfer that in, and 4.8 nautical miles is reflected on the DME. You can see on both the PFD and Switcho radio that we're currently on nav1. I can now rotate the course 1 needle. Using touch I can select nav2, back to the same button, press it in, and I can now rotate course 2. Touch the nav panel again, and I'm back to GPS. Let's now move on and we can test out the ADF. I'll just bring up the insert on the G1000 so we have better visibility. And once again, basically we're following the same process. Rotate the dial to change the small numbers. Hold down and rotate to change the large numbers. And press it as a button in order to make a particular frequency active. I'm sure you're getting the gist by now. Autopilot basically functions exactly as you would expect it to. Press a button and it becomes active on the PFD as well as on the Switcho in the indicator panel. The heading knob has 2 functions. One is obvious, it's straightforward, simply change the heading by rotating the dial, push it down and hold to sync, or click the button and that moves it into the gyro mode. Rotating the dial now will simply change the heading in the HSI overall, if you needed to make that adjustment. To set the barometer is again very straightforward, simply rotate the dial left or right to make the necessary changes. Press the button down and hold it down and it will reset to standard. Press it down once as a button and you can set your IAS. I did come across one problem, and that was setting the altitude. Using the rotary on the Switcho was not recording on the PFD. Not sure if I was doing something wrong or hadn't synced. However, if I activated it in Sim, thereafter I found that the altitude knob worked exactly as expected. Rotate the dial to move up in hundreds and push it in to move it up in thousands, and thereafter it worked without fault. I have queried this with VirtualFly. I mentioned earlier that if we press the barrow button we could enter IAS mode. To do that I need to activate flight level climb, then press the barrow button down to enter IAS mode. We can see the indicator on the Switcho has changed, and we can now dial in our speed. We can do a few spot checks on our engine indicator panel. RPMs for both engines are 700 on both, so that looks about right. On the PFD it's showing 0.2 gallons per hour, and that matches the 0.2 for fuel flow on the Switcho. So far so good. Selecting engine 1, I'm just going to increase the throttle, and we should see the same indication on the MFD, in Sim, and on the Switcho. RPM has increased to 1280, 1300. That seems to match pretty closely. We can also check our fuel quantities, showing at about 22, which matches on both instruments more or less. We've set our alt, but we haven't set our climb. Press the vertical speed button. In Sim, let's just switch back to the PFD, and we can see that vertical speed is activated. Now I can press the up and down buttons to set the vertical speed that I desire. I'm going to go for 600 feet per minute. The Switcho doesn't control your trim or your gear, but you do have an indicator. This will also show you your flaps position, which is very handy. And you can see here I'm adjusting the rudder and elevator, and it's changing accordingly. Let's now retract the flaps, and that should indicate, yep, that's working. Let's put the flaps down, let's push them all the way down, and once again the instrument is reflecting the movement of the flaps. Very useful. One other very useful feature is the audio panel. Simply swipe down from the top on any of the displays. We're currently tuned in to an active VOR on nav1, so let's set that, and we should hear the beep. And if we have a look at the audio panel in Sim, we can see that nav1 is lit, indicating that it's active. The Switcho Radio Panel from VirtualFly is a very versatile instrument, and considering all the different functions that it's capable of doing without any config, its footprint is relatively small, suitable for both desktop or to put it into a cockpit build, or perhaps like I've done on my Sim rig. I've installed the Switcho radio on my Next Level Racing static rig, where it has now found a permanent place. One thing I don't like about the Switcho radio is how reflective the screen is. I think this part of the video shows it off very well. Not an issue for me once I'm in the pilot's seat, but worth noting. Time to put the Switcho to test in a flight. Heading down the runway, let's just zoom in a little bit so we can compare one figure with the other. Gonna need a fairly steep initial climb, so I'm gonna rotate at about 75 knots. HSI is indicating the VOR 109.00. After departure, I'm going to head towards that. We're up, so gear up. Switcho indicating the gears in transition. Nose wheels up, and all the gears up. Coming up on 300 feet, so flaps up. We'll engage the autopilot shortly. We're going to climb to 1500 feet at a vertical speed of 500 feet per minute. Time to head towards the VOR, so I just need to adjust the course so I can dial in my heading. Then we'll get onto autopilot. Moving the course needle to bring the deviation bar central, that's about it. Adjust the heading, looking good. Pretty much set up now, just gonna turn more to the left, and then we'll engage the autopilot. Coming up on 600 feet, just trimming my nose down a little bit. HSI is indicating that we're more or less heading directly to the VOR, so let's bring in the autopilot now. And we've completed a successful departure. One concern I had was whether or not the autopilot on the Switcho radio would interfere with the one that I have on my Bravo throttle quadrant. Would one stop the other from operating? I'm happy to say, not at all. They're happy bedfellows. Speed 123 knots and slowly increasing, coming up on 700 feet. Loving this immersion. There's no doubt in my mind that the Switcho Radio brings value to the sim, steps up the realism and immersion. The auto configuration aspect alone is of high value, makes this a very appealing product. However, the price alone defines this as something for the serious enthusiast, the prosumer, perhaps pilot in training, or something similar. The Switcho Radio without the E upgrade is going to cost just under €900. Add in the E grade, which gives you the PFD and engine monitoring, and that's going to come in at €954 before shipment and any local duties or taxes. So this product is clearly not for everyone. This is aimed at the simmer where quality is of paramount importance, where limited lifetime warranties are available, and the peripheral itself takes you one step closer to being in a real cockpit. If you do fall into that high-end enthusiast category, or perhaps training for your pilot's license, then the Switcho Radio I recommend with the E upgrade represents really good value. The only rider I'd put on this is if you already have a G1000 NXI or something similar, then the value of this purchase is depreciated to some degree, as the aforementioned unit includes a lot of that functionality that we've seen today. I can't fault the quality, and I can't fault the functionality. However, there were one or two areas that I felt were found wanting. Just a personal preference, but I would have liked to have seen dual rotary dials. I would have preferred a screen that's not quite as reflective. Unless I was doing something wrong, then the activating for the altitude needs some attention in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. And assessing the accuracy of things such as oil temperature, etc. was a little bit difficult, as the color of the bars in the aircraft and the color of the bars on the display are different. This of course varies depending on the aircraft that you fly. All in all, however, I must say, using the Switcho E Radio, it's been an absolutely pleasurable experience. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you found it useful and informative. Stay well, look after yourselves, see you again soon, and ciao for now.